Previously on Squatch Spot, I returned to an area I've dubbed Area X, where I have experienced some very unusual paranormal happenings in the past while conducting Sasquatch research. And while there, I experienced some unexplainable equipment failures. I noted some unusual readings on my EMF detector, and I heard something very large moving through the brush in the cover of night. However, using the FLIR, I was unable to identify the creature. And while visiting a local Indian museum and cultural center, I gained insight into the Native Americans' belief on the topic of Sasquatch. And I have moved my investigation up to a higher elevation in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where I believe the Sasquatch reside during the warmer summer season. On this episode, I continue my investigation of these higher elevations. I have found some interesting impressions here, and I returned to a location where I encountered Sasquatch on March 3rd, 2020, and where I recently discovered Juvenile Sasquatch tracks. Here, I conduct night maneuvers in the dead of night with the hopes of discovering whether or not the Juvenile Sasquatch is still in the area. And a YouTube subscriber points out a very curious sound I captured on audio while in Area X. I don't know if you can hear that. And it's all coming up next here on Squatch Spot. To investigate whether or not that Juvenile Sasquatch is still here. I have moved up to a much higher elevation. I am just shy of 7,500 feet because I absolutely believe this time of year the Sasquatch are at these much higher elevations where there is an abundance of readily available water for them and an abundance of food. And also, as I mentioned on numerous episodes previously, I believe the Sasquatch move up to these very remote locations at these higher elevations to escape the influx of tourism that we get into the area, as we have millions of tourists visiting Yosemite National Park annually. So there are an abundance of people down at those lower elevations. So I think that is another reason why the Sasquatch move up to these very remote areas. And also, I think temperature really does play a key role in the Sasquatch's movement patterns, because now at those lower elevations we have temperatures reaching well over 100 degrees, and I think that would be very unpleasant for the Sasquatch. So I absolutely believe they are at these much higher elevations, and I am really focusing my efforts around the waterways because I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are going to be staying within very close proximity of those waterways, because I think at those peak temperatures throughout the day and those mid-afternoon to early evening, I think the Sasquatch will actually get into the water to cool off. So they are going to be in very close proximity to these water sources, and that is where I'm going to be focusing a lot of my investigation today. And also we'll be moving down to those lower elevations where I discovered what I believe were those juvenile Sasquatch tracks, because as I mentioned on previous episodes also, I do believe the Sasquatch family units have a hierarchy, and I think there comes a time where those male juvenile Sasquatch are cast out of the clan and they're kind of on their own roaming the forests looking to start their own family units. And this could be what is happening at the lower elevations where I discovered those footprint impressions. It is an area I am definitely keeping a close watch on. I've been monitoring it very closely, and I do believe that there are some reasons that juvenile Sasquatch could be hanging out at that location, because it is in very close proximity to where I discovered the Sasquatch nest. And if this Sasquatch had spent a lot of time in that area as it was there with its family unit or clan, I think it is probably familiar with that environment and it feels safe in that environment. So this may be a reason why that juvenile is still at those lower elevation and hasn't made the migration up to these higher elevations. So I definitely want to spend some time down in that area to just see if I can find any more physical evidence that that juvenile is still at that lower elevations, because I do think there is a good shot that it is. So that is the plan for the day. We are going to be spending the majority of the day up at these higher elevations, focusing our efforts around the waterways, focusing our efforts around the marshy areas to see if we can find any physical evidence that the Sasquatch are in the area. And later on, as the day progresses, we will move down to those lower elevations to investigate that area where I discovered those juvenile Sasquatch footprint impressions. So I have found some interesting impressions here. They don't look fresh. They look like they have been here for a while. But we have an impression here in the embankment, an impression here, and some more impressions leading into the forest behind me here. And it is moving from a water source, and it's moving into the forest and heading over in a direction where there's a very large meadow. And although these footprint impressions are not fresh, I do believe that these are actually bear tracks. So it is good to see that there are bear in the area, because I do think that the bear and the Sasquatch are going to have very similar diets. So a lot of times they are going to be in kind of the same areas. However, that being said, I don't believe that the bear move around as much as the Sasquatch, because during the winter months, the bear are going to be generally hibernating. And as I do not believe the Sasquatch are hibernating, they are going to have to move around a lot more to find the resources they need to sustain themselves. So I do think the Sasquatch are moving a lot more in the Sierra Nevada mountains here. And as I mentioned, I do believe they're going to have a similar diet as the bear. So at times they are going to be in close proximity to one another. When discussing the seasonal migration patterns of the Sasquatch, I've mentioned a number of times on previous videos my belief that the Sasquatch will venture down off the Sierra Nevada mountains and into the San Joaquin Valley, one of the largest agricultural producing areas in the world, in search of food in late fall and winter. After posting videos on YouTube of my investigations in the valley around Avocado Lake, I received an incredible amount of backlash from individuals in the Bigfoot community who argued the Sasquatch would not leave the safe havens of the forest habitats to venture into the farming communities in the valley. Since the posting of those videos, I have received a number of very credible reports confirming my theories. During the harsh winter months, many of the animals here in the Sierra Nevada mountains will migrate to lower elevations in search of food, and I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are among them. Moving along the Kings River drainage, the Sasquatch could move down off the Sierra Nevada mountains and into the San Joaquin Valley undetected. And the area around Avocado Lake is very thick with vegetation and is surrounded with a multitude of food sources for the Sasquatch. The Sasquatch have been spotted by locals in that area. And at that strategic time of the year, oranges are ripening. Oranges are a primary crop in the Avocado Lake area. I mentioned this earlier that I believe the Sasquatch and bear have very similar diets, and since these animals are very similar in size, I think it's reasonable to assume that their scat is also going to be very similar in appearance. And I think it has happened often that researchers will dismiss Sasquatch scat believing it is bear scat. And I saw online recently a discussion from some novice researchers who were asking how you would go about identifying a scat sample. And I did offer that it is very costly to be sending off these samples to have any sort of DNA extraction done. And I don't necessarily think it's a good idea because one, it's very costly, and two, if it is Sasquatch, it's just going to come back inconclusive. So I think it is much better to try to ascertain yourself using some other methods as to what left the scat behind. And you can do this by, one, scouring the area and look for the physical evidence that may help to identify the animal, meaning you're looking for those footprint impressions or the bear tracks. And also if you can find hair on the scat, not necessarily hair from the animals that were consumed by the individuals, but hairs that may have shed during the excrement process. If you can find hair on the scat, it would be very easy to identify those hairs using a high-powered microscope. And oftentimes public libraries have these microscopes that you can use for free that will absolutely get the job done. So definitely take a good look at it. If you can find those hair samples, collect those hair samples using the appropriate protocols, and take a good look at those hair samples using a high-powered microscope. And at that point, you should be able to ascertain what had left the scat sample behind. While in Area X, I was hearing something moving in the forest. However, using the FLIR, I was unable to identify it. After posting my previous video on YouTube, I was contacted by one of my subscribers who pointed out a very interesting sound I captured on audio while in Area X. Here is the clip with that intriguing sound. Hello and welcome to Squatchbot. Here is that same clip with the background sounds amplified. Hello and welcome to Squatchbot. Identifying sounds could be extremely difficult. The animals of the woods make an incredible array of sounds, and unless you have a visual of the animal actually making the sound, identification can be very challenging. I'm not an audio specialist, however, listening to this audio clip, it is clear there are numerous components to it. The thudding or motion sound you hear is me repositioning my feet as I turn towards the camera. Though the background howl sound did appear to have an elongated echo, which implied it was a very loud, distant sound, the howl was cut short by an almost metallic clacking or squawking sound. And as a result, the echo length could not be accurately measured. Continuing to analyze the audio recording, you can clearly hear a distinct hiccup or cuckoo sound just prior to the howl. Take a listen. This sound strongly implies bird, and the metallic clacking sound was also very bird-like. There was recorded bird sound on several of the video clips from Area X, and on that particular clip, I was moving through the environment. Reviewing the video footage, it did appear the bird sound was getting louder, implying I was moving towards it. I have shared this audio with a number of local outdoor enthusiasts, and the general consensus is bird, and the most likely candidate is the mountain quail. A covey of quail could absolutely explain the numerous components to this audio clip, and the fact I did not react to the sound strongly suggests it was an ordinary environmental sound. And although this may be the case, I do want to send out a big thank you to my subscriber who brought this sound to my attention. It was absolutely worth investigating. And I wholeheartedly appreciate all of your support. constructive discussion on topic, and collaboration. Together, we do have a much better chance of solving this mystery. While editing this video segment, I discovered some very intriguing sounds that are worth noting. While investigating an area I've been monitoring, my video camera, which was set up on a tripod a distance away from me, picked up some very intriguing sounds. The camera was situated near an incredibly dense cluster of new and old-growth pine trees, an area I took note of previously while visiting this area, which compelled me to continue monitoring this area. This pine cluster is incredibly thick with vegetation, so much so I was not comfortable pushing into the vegetation. The environment strongly resembles the tree cluster I experienced during my March 3rd, 2020 encounter, where the Sasquatch was hiding. When out in the field alone, it is never advisable to move into an area of thick vegetation where you do not have a clear visual of the surroundings or a safe response distancing, and although this area did raise some concern, I could not overlook the environmental nuances I believe are ideal for the Sasquatch. The location is at a perfect elevation for the Sasquatch this time of year. There are plenty of food sources in the area, and the location is less than 50 feet away from a flowing river. And this tree cluster area and the incredibly thick vegetation surrounding it makes an ideal bedding area for a family of Sasquatch. Analyzing the video, you will hear a distraught jay in the background. I mention this because I believe environmental sounds play a key role in Sasquatch encounters and should not be overlooked or trivialized. During my March 3rd, 2020 encounter, there was a distraught bird shrieking in the tree cluster near where the Sasquatch was hiding. I mentioned this during previous videos, and I have received an onslaught of ridicule and hate from the Bigfoot community who insisted the bird sound was absolutely irrelevant. I absolutely disagree, and I wholeheartedly believe bird sound can play a huge role in determining if there are Sasquatch or other predators in the area. Returning to the video analysis, as I moved into the brush, you will hear what sounds like a tree break, followed by rustling and a thud that sounded as if that branch had been dropped. The sounds were coming from somewhere behind the camera in the direction of that thick vegetation and tree cluster. As I moved towards the camera, a jet can be heard flying overhead. However, you will also hear a very loud thud in very close proximity to the camera that sounds very much like a tossed rock hitting the ground. Let's take a look at the video. During the initial recording of this video, I did hear the thud while in the environment. However, I dismissed the sound as a falling pine cone. I did not hear the branch break or the movement in the brush, and shortly after arriving at my camera, I moved out of the area. Clearly, I was not alone while at that location, and the sounds recorded are very reminiscent of Sasquatch behavior, and I'm not dismissing the bird sound. This location is prime Sasquatch habitat this time of year. It is an area I have been monitoring because of this, and the sounds captured on camera strongly support there may indeed be Sasquatch in the area, and I will definitely be returning to this area promptly to continue my investigation. Having spent a considerable amount of time investigating the higher elevations along the California Sierra Nevada mountains, I decided it was time to move down to the lower elevations and investigate the area where I recently discovered juvenile Sasquatch tracks. So I'm back in that area where I discovered those footprint impressions, which I strongly believe could have come from a juvenile Sasquatch. And this is also that location where I had my encounter in spring of 2020. And it is also the area where I discovered the nest site. So if this juvenile Sasquatch was cast out of its family group and it is kind of roaming the forest alone, I can absolutely understand why it would be hanging out in an area that it is familiar with, an area where it feels safe. So I have definitely been monitoring this area closely, and I have returned to this location to kind of scour the area and see if I can find any physical evidence that leads me to believe that the juvenile Sasquatch is still in this area and at these lower elevations. For those of you who may be new to my channel, I definitely encourage you to check out my March 3rd, 2020 encounter video. For now, I will very briefly list some of the evidence I have collected from this area during my initial encounter on March 3rd and my follow-up investigations of the area. The audio evidence I collected consisted of primate guttural noises, tree knocking, and a primate huff, followed by bipedal movement. And while I was standing next to the thick vegetation where the Sasquatch was hiding, there were some soft tapping sounds recorded. The photographic evidence I've collected was video footage of the Sasquatch hiding in the brush, and movement is clearly detected on the video footage. Also, I photographed multiple footprint impressions in the area, and I also photographed the nest site area. The physical evidence I collected consisted of multiple hair samples that I collected from the nest. The hair samples have been analyzed, and they do not match any known animal species. However, they do match Sasquatch hair anatomy. On May 24th, 2021, while I continued to monitor and investigate this area, I discovered some footprint impressions in the area that I strongly believe have come from a juvenile Sasquatch. And I think there's a very good chance this juvenile Sasquatch is still in the area. I've mentioned this numerous times before, but it is this buckbrush. It is an incredibly thick, dense vegetation with these needle sharp thorns on it, and I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are using this buckbrush to create an element of safety for them. And I mentioned when I discovered the nest site, it was completely surrounded by the buckbrush with the exception of the two corridors that were cleared out. And I believe the Sasquatch did that, and it gave them access into the nest site area. And there are a number of researchers who believe that when the family members and the clans of these Sasquatch are moving about, oftentimes they will leave the young juveniles in an area of relative safety while the older members of the clan or family group are out there gathering the resources. And I absolutely believe the buckbrush would offer them the perfect location to kind of create that safety net for them, creating that barrier. If the juvenile Sasquatch can get up underneath it, or get behind it and kind of surround themselves with it. So I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are utilizing the buckbrush to create that barrier of safety for them when they're hunkering down. And if this is a juvenile Sasquatch that we are kind of following here in this area, the footprint impressions I discovered the last time when I was investigating the area did lead up to an area that was kind of cleared out. It did look like a bedding area that was right up against the buckbrush, very similar to that bedding area I discovered at the nest site. So I absolutely believe the Sasquatch are using the buckbrush to create that barrier of safety for them when they are hunkering down in an environment, and I definitely spend a lot of time investigating the areas surrounding the buckbrush. I have been investigating this area now for hours, and although I have found some interesting impressions in the area, I haven't found anything definitive. However, I am going to spend some more time in this environment. In fact, I think I would like to stay and do some night surveillance tonight, because if there is a juvenile Sasquatch still in this area, I think we have a unique opportunity to interact with it. So I absolutely think it would be advantageous for us to remain in the area tonight and to conduct some night surveillance. So my primary reasoning for staying in this area to investigate whether or not that juvenile Sasquatch is still here, although I didn't find anything tangible with my exploration of the area today, I wanted to do some night maneuvers in the area just because I believe if this is a juvenile Sasquatch that is alone up in this area, I think it's going to respond very well to vocalizations. So I am going to be doing some vocalizations tonight. I am going to definitely be flooring the area, and let's see if we can ascertain whether or not that juvenile Sasquatch is still in the area. So I was going to do a tree knock on the tree behind me here, but the tree really isn't producing much of a sound. So I got a couple of sticks here that I'm going to whack together and see if we can get a response here. Keep your eyes peeled. On this clip, you may catch a glimpse of something flying past the camera. Though I didn't spend too much time on an analysis of this footage, Clearly it is of a flying creature, and the wing angling here and here, to me, suggests owl. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and let out a couple of whoops. I remained in the area for several hours, conducting surveillance and night maneuvers. Unfortunately, the wind picked up dramatically, so I was unable to use the parabolic microphone effectively, and with the exception of the owl, I did not pick up any animal activity on the FLIR. If the Juvenile Sasquatch is still in this area, it kept quiet. However, this outing was far from unproductive. The audio analysis of the tree break, movement, and thud sound recorded at those higher elevations strongly suggests to me that there are Sasquatch in that area. I've been monitoring that location because based on my research and reconnaissance, that area has a very high degree of probability for Sasquatch activity this time of year. And I strongly believe my theory has been substantiated, and I will be returning to that area promptly. And although we were unable to confirm the Juvenile Sasquatch was still at that lower elevation near the nest site, I will continue to closely monitor that area. And the recent unusual happenings I had in Area X compels me to continue to investigate that area. There is a lot of work to be done, and I'm going to continue my efforts. And I invite all of you to join my SquatchBot Facebook group, where I will be posting my progress on a regular basis. I want to thank all of you for your continued support of my channel. It is the kind words and encouragement I receive from all of you that keeps me motivated to continue my efforts and to continue to share my findings on YouTube. And until next time, I'm Darrin Smith, and I'll see you here at SquatchBot.